Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of racial assimilation in the wider canvas of the globalist pushed mass migration that's going on today. Now, different types of people from different areas of the world and different cultures and religions and so on, they assimilate into the Western host country at different rates. Some not at all. And some after 6, 7, 8, 9 generations are still not integrating and not even coming close, not looking like they ever will. The surplus populations of the world, Africa and the Indian subcontinent, for example, and parts of the Middle East, Afghanistan, that type of thing, the surplus populations of the world all produce people that do not assimilate. And there are various reasons for that. It's not exactly the same reasons in all instances, but the issue is they don't assimilate or integrate, and for the most part don't want to, and don't see why they should. They want to come to the rich Western country and get a lot of free stuff, a lot of handouts. Sure, they want to come for that. But in terms of assimilating or seeing Western culture and so on as desirable, no. There is some economic integration at some level, but even that's artificial in many ways. So let's look at this issue of assimilation, integration, and then look at the critical mass of white people representing the host culture. So what is, if white people are a minority in the Western world, what is the host culture anymore? Is there even a majority culture, given that white people are increasingly a minority? Now, there's lots of if you look at the lies the globalists tell, the globalist machine, the deep state, that's what they tell us. Crime's down, way down. Crime's not happening, when in fact crime's exploding and going through the roof. But they pretend that it's the opposite of that. They pretend that these illiterate peasant mass migrants, whether they be illegal or not, are all triple PhD rocket scientists, when it's the opposite of that. They're illiterate peasants. They're illiterate in their own language. So the global, and we can't rely or depend on anything that the globalists tell. The globalists tell us unemployment is 3% or 4%, when in fact it's 12 or 13%. So again, their lies are just endless, and all their lies are in aid of propping up an unsaleable globalist project that really nobody wants and nobody's asked for and nobody's voted for. Coming back to assimilation, just to sort of shock or somewhat shock, but when the mass migration thing was just kicking off, just the beginning, the population of Australia was about 17 million. So 17 million people. Today it's 27 million and change. Now, for a country with a population of 17 million to go to 27 million in less than 30 years is massive. It's huge. And now that doesn't include that's just citizens. That doesn't include people on work visas. It doesn't include students that will be given residency visas, and it doesn't include the resident if you like, the temporary resident visa population of Australia, many of whom are granted citizenship within a few years. Then they can bring out all their entire village from the third world and so on. So 10 million people immigrate, because the Australian birth rate, it's below replacement. So, and with the ratio of people dying off, Australia's population is if you count the people in the folks that are in retirement homes, Australia's population is slightly declining. So it's only a slight decline, but declining nonetheless. And so the average rate of migration into Australia over the last, again, getting close on 30 years, is over 300,000 per annum. Recently, it's been over 500,000 per year. So there are masses of people. Now, where are these people coming from? Well, when you look at the government statistics, again, they're deep state propaganda. It's, you can't rely on anything they say. But when you look at it, they point to the amount of people who are supposedly coming from Britain. And well, look, and the inference, they don't say it directly, the inference is, well, look at all these white people coming in. They still make up one of the largest groups, and they're in the first three in terms of sources of migrants. And so there was a lot of white British people coming in. But that's a lie as well. Lies upon lies. Why so many lies? It's because the globalist project is just simply unsupportable. They have to tell lies, and lots of them. So what a lot of Indians and Pakistanis and so on do is they go to England and get Britain and get residency. Then they come to Australia. So the on the statistics, the sources are, well, look, 300,000 people came in and 95,000 of them from Britain. See, what's your problem? But the reality is that most of those are Indians and Pakistanis just doing a transit scam, going to one white country in order to move to another, or going to New Zealand to come to Australia, and so on. So the reality is that the majority of these people coming from Britain and New Zealand, these other places, are Indian and Pakistani, and some Chinese, but mainly Indian and Pakistanis that are more into the scam than the others. So anyway, the reality is that there are masses of people coming in, and out of 300,000, maybe 10% of those are white, maybe 10%. That's a generous consideration. Now, considering that of the 300,000 that come in, only 15 to 20,000 are economically or just viable people, that they're going to produce more than they take. They're probably all going to be, with maybe the odd except, they're probably all going to be the white people anyway. I think there are very few brown and black people. There'd be some, but there'd be very few. It's mostly brown in Australia. There's not that many black people here. It's mostly brown. But there are some black, from Somalian refugee camps and Sudanese refugee camps, all of whom appear to be, or certainly most of whom appear to be serious problems in terms of crime and the like, and simply being lifetime welfare recipients. Now, coming back to the issue of straight assimilation, already I would say that the white Australian population is in minority. The government says, no, it's 65%. I don't believe that for a minute. And if I go into downtown Sydney, and I'm about to do that again in another few days, but I recently went into downtown Sydney during peak hour, sort of people getting to work, peak hour, and white people were in the clear minority. I mean, it's not even a debatable point, or you're not even going, it could be close to half. No. White people are clearly in the minority in downtown Sydney, through the business district and on the public transport and so on. In fact, there are more white people in the tourist areas now. It used to be the reverse. If you wanted to see non-white people, you went into the tourist. But no, there are more white people actually in the tourist areas than there are in the business district. Now, there was not long ago. Certainly was. I would have been in my 30s. You would see the odd sort of brown person around. They weren't that. You'd see them, but they weren't. It was all white. Now it's the complete reverse. If I sit in the main plaza, shopping district strip in downtown Sydney, if I go there, as I did, by the way, a week or so ago. So this is lunchtime. It's not the peak hour anymore. Again, it's like spot the white person. It's that bad. So the idea that white people are still some 2 in 3 majority is bullshit. And I think it's already less than 50%. Again, things like temporary residents and students can skew the imagery there, but it almost doesn't matter. Many of those will become and demand and expect and think that they're entitled to get citizenship or permanent residency or some approximation of that. So what happens when the host culture drops to below half? Can you say there's even a host culture anymore? I would argue no, but does an all powerful, if you will, host culture create the conditions for assimilation? Well, if we look at the American experience, where black people, even that have been in the United States for 20 generations. So they've been around white people and around white technology and white methodologies, white attitudes, and so on. And where it's 7-8 generations since slavery ended, and so on. That even there, black people are assimilated at a very low rate. It's a very small rate of assimilation or integration, as in they'll intermarry into white culture and so on. No, I've been to the United States many times, spent a lot of time there, and I've noticed that black chicks are keen on black chicks want the white guys. Why do they want the white guys? Well, and I've spoken to black women about it. Well, white guys are better behaved. They make more money. They're more reliable. They're more stable. They're more likely to be monogamous and this. So the black chicks want that, but they still think they can take their sassy black attitudes and so on into that relationship and expect it to work out. So in other words, they want the white guy's money. They want the stability. They want the white guy's money. That's why they want to go, date a white guy. But they're not a very attractive prospect for the white guy, and vice versa. Now there are some intermarrying, by the way, but it's just not much. And given the amount of time the populations, the black and the white, that is, have lived side by side, you would expect, and given there's been a very clearly dominant host culture, the white Christian culture, you would think that the assimilation would have been, well, far more substantial than it has been. And now, as I went around the United States, it was so rare. In fact, top of my head, I can't think I ever saw it, but it was so rare seeing a black and a white, woman or like a white and black sort of people together in a relationship. Where I did see it was where the black guy was like 1/8 black. So really you would hardly tell that he was black. He was kind of swarthy, maybe a little bit swarthy, but that would be it. No, it doesn't mean that people can't fall in love. They do. And that's fine. That's great. But the rate of assimilation after this amount of time and this length of exposure to a dominant host culture, it's astonishing that there hasn't been more. But wherever you see blacks anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter. Even with other black tribes, the assimilation and the integration is very low. If you look at places like in Nigeria, where you've got Igbo tribes and the other tribes, all that sort of stuff. The integration rate, you'd think the integration would be very high. I mean, to our eyes, to white eyes, they're all black. What's the problem? But they see it quite differently. And their integration rate, not that it doesn't happen, it does. It's just an astonishingly low integration rate for tribes that have lived side by side for thousands of years. So it's very rare that they integrate outside of their tribe. And this has been shown in the United States. Now, even though they've been transplanted from Africa, and even though they've been mixed up, so they didn't like the idea. This is the slavers and the plantation owners and so on. They didn't like the idea of people from the same tribe and the same language being together, because they thought that would they could conspire and plan rebellions or whatever the case may be. So they tried to mix them up, and so they were mixed African tribes. Now, given they were coming from West Africa, I suppose that was easier said than done. But nonetheless, they made a concerted effort, certainly in some of the plantations I looked at, to make sure that there weren't only one tribe. So they mixed the tribes up, and so the different people from different tribes were procreating and getting together and so on. Now, you'd think that would create the basis or a platform or a foundation for, okay, well, we're outside of our direct tribal thing, but instead they sort of came with almost like there was another superimposed black culture over the top, and that's failed to integrate into white culture in the United States. Now we could argue, well, it's all those damn racist Nazi white people. Well, no, it's not that. It's not that at all. What white men probably would take black women if the black women were behaved like white people. So there's been an inability, almost a total inability of the black people to adopt white behavior. They've adopted white consumerism, sort of aspirational consumerism. I want that waterfront mansion. I want that nice car. I want those designer label clothes. That they've done. Okay. But the idea of, well, I have to work to get it, or if I study hard, I'll get a better job, or that's totally failed, and thus the integration into white society and merit-based capitalist society, that's failed completely, and it's even got worse because in the last 30, 40 years or so, this idea of equal outcomes, which has permeated the education system well before it became a serious political talking point, is that, well, why don't we just give them a degree? Why don't we just give them a master's, give them a PhD, and then that'll make everything equal? So now they're not only still a junior high school level education and at the bottom end of that scale, but now they're swanning around with PhDs saying, well, I'm entitled to the waterfront mansion. Why can't I have it? Must be because of racism, not because their appetites for white baubles has been whetted unreasonably and without any careful forethought. So what about these other things? Now, in Europe, Africa is a big source of migration. They're not even coming close to migrating. If you look at the Caribbean blacks that came to came to England in like the late 1940s and early 1950s and around there. So they're already at sort of fourth generation, and still the integration is absolutely minimal. Still they live in the ghettos together. Still they behave just as they did in the Caribbean islands, just with whetted appetites for consumer goods. That's the only difference. And again, not that there's been zero integration, there's been some, but the integration rate is incredibly slow for what's now 4 generations down the track. Now let's contrast an Italian. We'll take two, and I'll use examples of the Mediterranean basin. Now they're swarthy, but they're white and they're Christian and that sort of thing. So that gives them I suppose, something of a start. They come from that wider sort of Christian, Romano-Greco sort of foundation. So again, there's sort of those things are in place, which helps with integration if they want to go to host white country. So when the Italians came from the refugee camps after World War II to Australia, they didn't integrate at first, and again there were huge failures in both sides here. The immigration camps. You want to go to Australia? Okay, you must attend English language lessons. If you don't, then you're not going anywhere. And the Italians themselves should have at the refugee camps, they should have, if I was going to migrate to, I don't know, China or Japan or somewhere, I would consider it a mandatory preparatory requirement that I would learn the language. I mean, it wouldn't even be something I'd have to think about. That would be an absolute utter necessity in my view. Because I want to integrate, I want to be able to fit in with that. But these people, the peasants don't think that way, and they can't understand the idea of working and education the same way that maybe other people do. Now, so I'll take two types of Italians. One was a rural farmer, and their family have lived on the land for gazillions of years, and they have like an olive or something farm, so farming something along those lines. If it's not olives, it was maybe eggplants or something. Anyway, a farm, and it's owned by the family in generations. They don't buy property or have mortgages or so on. The house was built with their own hands by cutting the stones from the local area and this sort of thing, and so they have like some sort of outside septic tank toilet and the rainwater shower. It's pretty basic sort of stuff, and again they're in a rural area, so they're in a refugee camp, and they come to Australia. Now, they're illiterate in their own language, so they've got no idea really of city living and exams and schools and so on. They've maybe had a couple of years of schooling at best, sometimes not even that. So they're coming to an advanced economy. I mean, they're effectively sort of the lower end of the middle scale of the economies of the world. So they're coming from there to a first world economy, and they're coming to a city. They're not going out into the rural area. They're coming to a city, for goodness sake. So how long does it take them to assimilate? Well, quite a long time. The first generation, they hang around in a group. They don't bother to learn English. They can barely speak English, even though they're arriving when they're 19 or 20 years old. By the time they're 50 or 60, they still are speaking kindergarten level English. But they've had children. Now the children will marry other Italians. So the first generation stays with the crowd and also can speak Italian. They speak Italian at home, and you can tell by the way they speak English, that sort of Latin inflection on the vowels and so on when they speak English. Their children, not so much. So the grandchildren are not so much the Italian. So the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren, either one of those generations will fully assimilate into the white host culture. It's unlikely they'll marry another Italian or someone of Italian descent. They may, but it's unlikely. So the assimilation rate is close to total by the fourth generation. It's in majority by the third generation. It's noticeable in the second, majority by the third, almost total by the fourth. Let's take now somebody from Rome. Now here's a guy is a newspaper editor, and he's in a refugee camp with his family. He's in a refugee camp, and he takes a different view. He's lived in a city all his life. He's been to the university. He's done all the schooling. He's got the whole thing there, and as does his wife. She's like a primary school teacher, something like that. And so they want to come to Australia, or they want either Australia, America, or Canada. So it's English in all cases. So they go to, and they aggressively, or not aggressively, with much commitment and diligence, go to the English language classes that are available in the refugee camps, and to become proficient in English, they try and lay their hands on books written in English so they can read them and again become proficient there. Their children that are young are also, hey, you have to learn English. So they, when they do, and they get to Australia, when they do arrive in Australia, they all speak competent English, or good enough anyway. And so they're able to fit in pretty quickly. The children, they don't live in an Italian neighborhood. They think, no, we don't want to do that. We want to fit in. We want to assimilate. So we're going to go into a neighborhood where there's few or no other Italians. We don't want to fall into the trap of just hanging out with other Italians. So they make a very conscious decision and commit to integrating at all levels, socially and economically, and into marriage and so on. So their children that are young, they're under 5 years old when they come to Australia, those children are pretty much integrating in the first generation, and their children are 100% integrated. So that's the difference between rural peasants from the same country, Italy in this case. You could say the same thing for the Greeks. Now, the Greeks, I've seen grandchildren, met a number actually of grandchildren of original Greek migrants. This is in Australia. And so the Greek migrants came out when they were quite young, early 20s, and their grandchildren still see Greek politics and Greek sports, and they still speak Greek, and so they see themselves as Greek, and Greek issues as being of primary concern to them in their day-to-day lives. Not Australian stuff or Australian politics. Fuck that. It's Greek stuff is the most important. So it's really the fourth generation of rural peasant Greek farmers that integrate into Australia. Again, even though they're Christian and all that sort of stuff. This particular Greeks, they're rather swarthy. In fact, the grandchildren of the Greek migrants, he's married a Greek, a Greek girl, and when when they're sitting together, we were at a wedding actually, and I was sitting together, and they were talking Greek amongst themselves. They're the grandchildren, this is the third generation or second generation Australian born, and you'd think they just come from Greece yesterday, but those who had come earlier still, and they're now at the fourth generation or third generation local born, they have assimilated. But again, you look at the Greeks that come from the city, downtown Athens or something, they assimilated within 2 generations. So those things need to be considered. That where's your source of migrants? Now, getting migrants from the third world who've had no or 1 or 2 years schooling, they're rural peasants out from the middle of nowhere. The assimilation process would already take at least 4 generations just on that. Then you add in that they're Islamic, or you add in that they come from very severe and intense cultures like Indian culture, or they have complete behavioural differences like from Africa. Then even after 7 or 8 generations, they're still not integrating. I don't think they ever will. And if you look in the case of Indians and Pakistanis or the subcontinent people generally, their rate of integration is very low. Every generation sends back to husbands to India or the subcontinent for husbands and brides. They want to stay genetically and culturally separate. Sure, they'll economically integrate, but only when you're prepared to give them free stuff. If they have to actually work to produce wealth, they're not interested. So they're hopeless migrants, useless migrants. They create, there are whole areas of Sydney that are Indian only. And again, they will only marry, they won't integrate with the local society at all. And if any member of their diaspora thinks about marrying, and they get threatened to be, they're cut out of the will. You'll be an outcast. You'll never be spoken to again, and all that. Meanwhile, those people accuse us, the white folks, of being racist. By the way, so they're determined to stay culturally and genetically pure. And we see this in Fiji, where the Indians coming in the 1860s, there's not even 2% level of integration after 160, 170 years. So these people aren't going to integrate. They don't want to integrate. Don't see why they should. If you look at, say, the lower caste Indians and Pakistanis and those sort of things, particularly where Islamic faith is an issue, they don't see why they should integrate into the Christian thing. If you want to convert to our way of doing things, we can have that conversation, they say. But the idea that we'll convert to Christianity, not a chance. And again, they send back to husbands and brides to the village of their ancestors. So they're not integrating, not wanting to integrate, don't see why they should. They're coming for the free stuff, pure and simple, nothing else, to the West for free stuff. So we're looking at a vast host of people. Now, the Chinese, there's more integration with the Chinese than there is with those other groups, but it's still very low. It's still. I mean, you'd struggle to get to 10%. Even by the third or fourth generation. That may happen over, many hundreds of years. You might, but it would take that long. So we've got these minority groups have been brought into the West by the globalists. No one's voted for it. Nobody wanted it. No one asked for it. Being brought in by the globalists, forced upon the white citizenry. And if you complain about it or point it out, they accuse you of being Hitler and everything, racist, bigot, Nazi. But the reality is these groups aren't going to assimilate. And the rate of assimilation, to whatever extent it happens, is snail-like slow. I mean, it's slower than molasses. And so even after 500 years, integration won't have taken place. Or even as in majority integration. But by that stage, whites will be a small minority in the West, assuming current trends continue, of course. So we come to the issue now of what makes a good migrant. Well, someone who wants to and believes it's their duty, if not obligation, to assimilate. and to not want to take from the state, but to say, well, I want to produce something worthwhile. I want to justify my existence here by, working hard or, I don't know, inventing the cure for cancer or whatever it might be, but to make a contribution. Now, the amount of people that are coming in, even the statistics out of this is privately and quietly sort of kept under wraps, but in Australia and the UK and so on, the amount of mass immigrants that are economically viable and produce, if you like, a surplus, are about, in Australia, the generous end of the equation is 5%, but it's closer to 3% in reality. So to every 500,000 people that they're bringing in, most of whom are illiterate peasants, by the way. And even if they're not illiterate peasants, they don't want to integrate or assimilate in any way. They just here to parasite off the rich host country. There's really 3%. So out of 500,000 people coming in, maybe 15,000 are economically viable. I mean, that's how small the numbers are. So if mass migration, or if migration rather, is restricted to people that are going to and want to believe they should assimilate and integrate, and who can produce if you like, an economic surplus, they can arrive and start productive work straight away and are needed in jobs. They're small. Even at the generous end, Australia would be bringing in, say, 25,000 a year. And that's being generous. It's more likely to be less than 20,000. That would be so it would go from 500,000 to 20,000 if you want to have a merit-based, skills-based immigration system. So that would be the difference. Immigration can still continue, but that would be the difference. Now we come to, say, the case of the Indian Brahmins. Now, the Brahmins are the upper caste in India, and they believe that they're demigods anyway, and they almost are in India. In the caste system, they're the keepers of the knowledge, and they lord it over the rest of them. And so these Brahmins, and again, I encountered them when they first started arriving in Australia, and the sense of entitlement and the sense of smug superiority was just off the charts, and it's still that way today. Most of the Indian nationalist news announcers are Brahmins, and they have a very Brahmin view of things. I mean, they went orgasmic over Rishi Sunak being installed undemocratically as the Prime Minister of Britain. You came and colonized us, and now we colonize you, you damn fascist Nazis. So anyway, these Brahmins don't want to assimilate or integrate. They believe themselves to be culturally, spiritually, and genetically superior to white people in every way. So they've got no intention of assimilating, none whatsoever. And they come to the West simply to strip it of its wealth, not to produce anything. And even Brahmins that I would, and it's certainly a philosophical sense, and I do enjoy talking philosophy with them. In a philosophical sense, they seem quite bright and quite advanced and quite jovial, actually, in their discourse. But they still see the world as having a fixed amount of money in it. And so they're coming to the West to take what the West has, the idea of creating wealth, building wealth, this sort of thing, that they can't even comprehend it. We're coming to take. We're coming to take Western wealth and put it in our own pockets. And when the Indians arrive, and this is the Brahmins orchestrate this to a large degree, when the Indians arrive, they set up economic zones where Indians will only do business with each other, will only buy from each other, and so on. And they've got no intention of integrating outside of that diaspora, unless they just absolutely have to, like they go to the national grocery store chain to buy milk or something. They'll do that, but that's it. That's the extent of their integration, and they think they're entitled to affirmative action jobs left, right, and centre, and they get them. The Australian government, the Western governments generally, it seemed to just roll over and grovel and say, "Yep, we'll give you all these," and so that the government invents all these jobs that aren't needed, just so they can give them to these Indians that don't want it, that come to the West. So we've got a situation where hardly any of the mass migrants Again, the major source of mass migrants is Africa and the Indian subcontinent and places like Afghanistan. The major source there. None of these people want to, think they should, and by historical example, won't integrate. So when you've got a vast number of, a vast minority population, which I would argue now in the overall sense is a majority, that are not integrating, don't want to integrate, don't see why they should, then this can only spell problems. So the only way out of this impasse is either to enforce mass migration or to create circumstances and conditions so these people leave of their own accord, or in the case of illegals, to deport them. But this is, if Indians are told, look, if you come to Australia, you cannot marry, you cannot get a bride or a husband from the host, from India, you're not going to do that. You're not going to get a government job handed to you. If you want to send money back to India, we'll tax it at 50%, and so on. They go, oh, I don't want to come here then. And they wouldn't. But then what have you lost? You've lost nothing. You've lost people that either want to parasite off you or strip the host country of its wealth while they swan around thinking they're demigods. So what have you lost if these people don't come? You've lost nothing. And so it's more desirable that they don't come. Now, they may come and say, you know what, I want to integrate, I want to assimilate, I want to marry, and procreate with a local person. Fine. I've got the credentials and the qualifications where I can win a job on my own merit. Fine. You're welcome. And people like that should be welcome anytime. But there's just not very many of them. There's very few of those people. If you say to certainly every Indian I've met, if you say to them, you can't come here to Australia or to the West generally, if you want to marry, if you want to bring husbands and brides from the home, if you say that to them, they go, no, screw it, I'm not coming here. And they wouldn't. So they would either self-deport or they would not come to the West in the first place. Same would be for the Africans. You're not getting any benefits, free this, free that. If you come to the West, well, I'm not going. I only want to go somewhere where I get shitloads of stuff for free. So there's lots of mechanisms in place for Western governments to stop mass migration and to ensure that only people that want to assimilate integrate. Now, if that's not done, I think in another 100, 200 years, the West, as we've ever known it, simply won't exist. You've been with Tasseless today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.